We had a nice process of choosing work for this exhibition. And then in the end it came out this fantastic title, which we are not translating into German, by the way, because it's like an art piece as well, I think. The Land, double point, not without a politic. You have sent me several suggestions. And of course the land is, first of all, it's the land of where we are living. It's the ground of our being, but it's also the landscape, which comes into mind immediately. So how did this title come up in your mind?
I think for so long I've made work about the land, literally, and also thinking about histories of landscape painting and how the landscape has shaped so much of my life in thinking about, I guess, my life, but also just our lives in general, because there's so many policies and politics and cultural constructions that happen on the land, that are about the land, that shape how we live, literally. I mean, if you just think about where a home is, it's situated in the land. There's a context for it. There are governances around it, ordinances around what can constitute a home and things like that. So it seems to be, it's also part of this spaceship Earth, you know, that we're on this like rock that's floating in space, and then on that rock we have like designated ways of how to live in it, and which is kind of strange in some ways of thinking about it, but then also I guess it's one way of organizing people through a kind of power system. Yeah.
Also the ways of the communities, like the whole black history and the movements of slavery, the movements of migration and the movements of a whole society that's in your work inherent. But that's something you thought about as well, linked to the land, I guess. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from South Carolina. It was a large, it was a place where there was a lot of importation of slaves. There was so the slave trade was quite robust, for lack of a better word, there. And my people were there to toil the land. And both of my family, both my mom and my dad are from rural parts of South Carolina. And so the land is very much a part of the politic there. And I have relatives who migrated up north, as many blacks from the South do. Or South have. So yeah, the land has been quite a significant part of my formation in terms of thinking about it as a political site, also as a site of toil, labor, as a site of exploitation, and then as a site to traverse, a place, you know, it's a site where people have come to, as you have said, and then also have left. And so, yeah, those histories have informed my thinking.
You work in painting, this auritic and loaded material. And how, from the landscape, did you come to do your own paintings? So I think it's a longer way, but
it's not mostly straightforward.
But where did you see the first landscape painting, maybe, or where is there any initiation you had to decide?
I mean, what I'm hearing you ask me is like, how did I get to painting?
Yeah.
And so I would say it was really out of necessity in many ways. When I was in college at Virginia, I studied foreign affairs, and I took printmaking classes, and I also took poetry classes. So I thought I was going to be a poet, and I also loved printmaking. So when I graduated, I didn't have access to a printmaking press or the assets for intaglio or, you know, lithographs. So I had to learn. So I taught myself how to paint so that I could actually do it on my own, and I slowly built up tubes of paint that I could then make a painting with, because I was so broke after college that I had no money, and I had enough for 4 tubes of paint that were on sale, and none of them were primary colors. So it was like a purple and orange, and some weird green, and like, you know, whatever else they had. And I had like those 4 non-primary colors to try to make a painting on. And I used a sheet because that's what I had access to. And so it took several years for me to finish a painting because I had to accumulate enough money to buy more tubes of paint and then learn how to paint. I had to slowly shrunk the size of the structure. And I think the first painting I finished was probably about a year and a half to 2 years after graduating from college. And it was like 8 by 10.
And when was it? Was it in Chicago?
No, that was in DC. So I went to school in Virginia, in Charlottesville, University of Virginia, and then I moved to DC after college. And so I was going to like the Phillips Collection in DC and also the National Museums of Art, like the Smithsonian, and I was looking at paintings, but really I was looking at a lot of the paintings in the Phillips Collection, and that's how I was learning how to paint. So I would go every week.
You were not studying art at the time.
No.
You were studying economics.
Well, I had studied foreign affairs, and I was living in DC at that time. I was working at a record store, and then I got a job at a law firm. And so when I got the job at the law firm, that was in preparation for a more kind of proper profession, like, you know, either legal or business. Because after DC, I moved to West Africa. I joined the Peace Corps. So I lived in West Africa for 2.5 years, and I was making paintings there as well. Yeah. And then after that, when I got back to the States, I moved to New York, and I worked at the law firm in New York. So the same law firm that had worked in DC, when I got back from the Peace Corps, I went to work with them in the New York office. And from there, I was trying to decide what to then do with my life. And I had applied to business school, and I had gotten into business school, and I was going to go, and I deferred a year to study art. And so that's when I moved to Chicago, because I had applied to the post-bac program at the Art Institute of Chicago. They did not admit me. They admitted me as a transfer undergrad. So I went there as an undergrad student for a year. And I think that's the date, because I had to fax to the business school that I was not going to go to orientation the next day.
You still kept it.
Yeah, well, I just remember the date because it was really it was a decision that was really quite, you know, it was a big decision. Yeah.
But because today, living more than 20 years now in Los Angeles, having gone through the famous Kellogg School with all the famous teachers and everything, you're yourself a teacher and now professor and now the head of UCLA.
The chair for now, yeah.
That for teaching, this all helps, I think, also going through how much this educational side or this university system in Los Angeles and the way of teaching, how much does this influence your work or probably also barricade your work, because it's a lot of thinking all the time. Yeah,
I think it's been very helpful. I mean, I work amongst amazing artists who also teach, and then the students that we have are pretty amazing. And so I've learned a lot from them, like in terms of like what they're reading, what they're interested in. New ways of expressing themselves in terms of like language that they use, or in everything else, you know, from fashion and music to, yeah, it's just been a really fascinating experience working with young artists, but also artists that I admire quite a lot. Yeah. So I feel like I've been very lucky, even though it's incredibly hard. Yeah.
So the process to become an artist, but also to treat painting, was a much longer process. But then when you arrived at CalArts, painting was kind of forbidden in the time, wasn't it? We have very early work from 2001 here. It's one of the first ones. Maybe you can talk about this one, because there's so much in it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was forbidden at CalArts, but I would say that the kind of critique that you got would make you want to perhaps think twice about it, because it was, yeah, you know, it's interesting. A lot of really interesting painters have come out of CalArts, because I think to paint there, at least at the time when I was there in the late 90s and early aughts, you had to really be committed to it and like really believe that there was something that you could say through it. And so it's been very rewarding, that process, because there are things that I could say through painting that I can't say through video, or performance, or things that I can't say through sculpture that can only be said through painting. I mean, it's kind of like with any medium. There are things that the medium, there are histories that the medium has, there's forms that it takes, and there's ways that content can be delivered through it that other mediums don't allow. And so in terms of painting, for me, I can use the rich history of painting, also its materiality, the kind of physicality of it, and I think its relationship to the body is also interesting, in the eye, like how you can use material to point to that, like the kind of corporal. And so with one of the paintings downstairs, the one from 2001, I think it is, it was my first year. It was at the end of my first year of grad school, and there's so much going on in it. There's cotton in there, there's landscape, there's a bald eagle, there's the sky, it's on a bed duvet. So I mean, so much of my current work is all coming out of this one painting. There's so much happening in there. There's also like lined paper that you have in school, and there's like a little garden in the. I mean, there's like a ton of shit going on in this in this painting. And I had a studio visit with Gary Simmons. He was like a visiting artist, like towards the last part of that year, and I was so excited to meet with him because he's a phenomenal artist, but it was just exciting. I was a young artist, and he was like the hottest thing going on, and I wanted to hear what he had to say. And he showed up like an hour late for the meeting. He had like maybe 3 to 4 minutes to meet with me, but he said something that actually stuck. And he said, you've got like 50 paintings going on in this painting, so you should live with it for as long as you can. Stare at it, live with it until you can't stand it any longer. And when you can't stand it any longer and you want to rip it off the wall, live with it for another 3 months. I took it to heart, and I did that. That painting hung for like the rest of that quarter and all throughout the summer. I was fucking sick of it to death. But that being said, I kind of absorbed a lot what was happening in that. And I think over time and years of thinking about that process, and then looking back at my work, and also in the process of teaching, where I could see that also happening in other young students or younger artists, where it's like, oh, you've got like a lifetime of work in that one piece right here, just from what they're saying, and then also what the work is. Yeah, I'm really grateful for that moment, because it's just helped me to also look at present works that I'm doing and to see where there's seeds there that can still germinate.
I think also we can see in the exhibition, also looking back on the early works and combining them with recent works, that there's a total continuation of themes, but also of formalistic solutions or of processes, because in your painting as well, in your film, it often takes over months or even years until you finish. So probably this long looking is something that you have kept on your whole career, actually, I just realized now. Yeah.
I think I just really enjoy the process, but I also, maybe there's a bit of, maybe there's a kind of caution, or maybe it's just part of my training where I tend to live with the work until I have a better understanding of what it is, if it's from a process that's not already kind of conceptualized prior to. And so with certain kind of works like painting, one can just kind of be involved in a process and sit with it to see, to then formulate where it needs to go from there. And so I think from the process of painting, I have gotten a sense of patience, or I've embodied time as a kind of, I guess, not clocking in so much.
And how do you link the notion of painting, because a painter painting is always about materiality, and it can also stay on this point to be just a painting and having just the painterly impact. But in your work, I mean, through the material, you said in the beginning you didn't have money, you just took a sheet. But you did it on purpose, more and more, that you use materials that have already a history, because you're very interested into histories. And do you think a painting or your paintings as political statements as much as your films, probably?
I mean, I think there's a politic to everything. Mm-hmm. So even the person who thinks they're making some formalist object or this thing out of beauty that is somehow unmoored from a politic that's ludicrous, because that whole notion there's a political aspect to that desire.
But because you are in your video work so much interested also to tell stories or to retell stories, because you're re-embodiment, or you are embodying. Mm-hmm. Probably you can tell us what you mean by embodiment of certain text, because the text you're choosing is not for nothing. It's so great text that you choose. Mm-hmm. So important text. In our exhibition we have two political speeches, mm-hmm. one from a US president and the other from an activist or mm-hmm. a black, who was involved into Black Power movement, mm-hmm. Both from the 60s, mm-hmm. And they're so contemporary in a way, even mm-hmm. so we have passed through many other decades of political systems mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
During the time. So this embodiment of a speech of the 60s, what is your aim with it, or what is your idea about that?
Why am I choosing them?
Yeah.
Well, I'm choosing them because, well, I'm curious about them. Mm-hmm. It was a way for me to just relearn some of the things that I'd learned back in years past, and or just had heard about more. The text that you're talking about, like Pitfalls of Liberalism by Stokely Carmichael, or OBJ's speech, The Great Society. When I went to look at them again, I was curious about what they were saying. I was curious about the language of it. I was curious about the poetry. The first speech that one of the first ones that I did was the Lyndon B. Johnson text, The Great Society. I was like, well, what is this Great Society? Like, I want to live there. So, I went back and read it, and it was also during the time of like George W. Bush II was in power, not a man gifted with poetry at all. And so I was curious about other political moments and the lyricism of those speeches. And so I was struck by how lyrical the Great Society speech was. I was also struck by the tenets of it. There are things that are still in need now. Thinking about racial equality and justice. Thinking about healthcare and educational systems and environmental policies that don't poison the waters and the air that we breathe. And it was also beautifully written. And so I was struck by that, living in the time that I was in. And I think I performed that speech the first time in 2006. And so I guess I use the word embody because for me to perform it, I need to live with the text in a certain way and to rehearse it in a certain way where it's more in my body as well as like in my mind and in my thinking. And trying to, I guess, think about what it means to actually like deliver that text with a certain kind of belief, or at least a certain kind of understanding of the self that would deliver that text, or the individual that would deliver it at that time, perhaps, mm-hmm. or maybe what I wanted.
Yeah.
That individual.
Let's talk about Preacher Man too, because it's an important film. You wanted to have it absolutely in the exhibition, mm-hmm. and because I'm interested why did you want to have it? Because of the notion of liberalism in it, and also because it's indifferent or in contrast probably to Johnson. It's someone of the Black civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. So. Please share your thoughts about this film and the history.
I wanted to use it because it's a great text. It's the Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture text, and it's called "The Pitfalls of Liberalism," and actually a colleague, Adrian Edwards, suggested I read it. And in terms of, like, we were having a conversation around the violence that we're experiencing, who gets to enact violence, and when is it called violence and when is it not. And so that text is really remarkable because it talks about who has the power to use weaponry or who gets to use violence. And really it's white people who get to use violence. You know, it's state sanctioned. But if a black person or people of color use it, especially for liberatory reasons, it's considered terrorism, or it's considered criminal. It's pathologized. And so that text was really important to work with, especially now, and actually back then as well, because black people have experienced so much violence against, towards us and against us from the state, and or from individuals who are protected by the state, and we don't have that. We don't have that same protection, and that text is really important because it points out those inequalities, and it points out. It just points out where the power lies, and it suggests that can be that we should question that and perhaps do something about it.
Yeah, that's also very touching in the text you are quoting in this big flag, where you painting collage. It's a lot of material in where you.
Where I sewed it. Yeah.
Yes, you sewed the text of a Vietnam soldier because of his color, or he was in a minor situation. Yeah,
it's Clinton Drake, and I got that quote from Michelle from The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Michelle Alexander wrote the book, and he's talking about how there's a type of poll tax because he, I think, was caught smoking marijuana, and therefore wasn't able to vote because he was charged, and there was a fine that he had to pay that was exorbitant. And I think his son also served in the Second Persian Gulf War, and so he's talking about the inequities that he's experienced, being a black person who is a soldier who's fought for the country, and for a minor offense such as that to withhold his ability to vote. And it's doubly, there are many words, tragic, fucked up, evil, and a whole mountain of other words that we could use about that kind of situation, the situation happening in the States where there's so many black and brown people who are, part of the carceral system, who are in jail for drug offenses. And now, there are weed stores on every corner in California. They're often owned by white people who are making a slew of money, and black people are still in jail for these minor offenses of like marijuana. And it's just one more kind of example of just how twisted the system is for some, and how and how cherry it is for others.
And through your practice, do you think the art field is a good way of pointing out inequalities and of pointing out what you do in your work? It's about.
I think every field is a great place to do that. I mean, when I think about the civil rights movement and aspects of it, there are funeral homes who, which was one of the few businesses that blacks could have during, Jim Crow South. And so they donated, they donated their cars, or like they drove people around, or they let their sites where the funerals happened be gathering places. There are people who cooked or who were great at that, and they provided food for people who were doing other things. So I mean, I think it takes everybody, and you just use whatever skill sets you have. And my skill set, or at least the one that I think I have in this vocation, that's what I have, and so that's the way that I use it. So I mean, I think it takes everybody.
Mm-hmm. And one last theme that is also important for you, but also for all of us actually, it's the notion of the home. You talked in the beginning of it from your own home, or your own homeland, let's say, but also how much do you think home is a representational place? I mean, why do you take the home so much as a reference? We have, for example, the chair.
I mean, in some regards, it's just, I mean, it's the root, right? I mean, I was born in one, raised in one, and live in one now. Thankfully, I get to live in a home because there's so many people who don't have, or there are people who have outside homes outside, you know, because they don't have a proper, well, they don't have a structure like some of us do. Now, I would just say they don't have a proper structure, because actually everyone should have a fucking home, you know, a shelter to live in, you know, that keeps them safe. But I chose it because it's where so much of my own indoctrination happened. It's where so much of my learning happened. So much where I learned about love, history, and learned. You know, so much of my foundation was there. I think it's there for many of us, no matter what kind of construct or place you come from. And it was also readily available. It's like I used what I had, and things in my home is what I had to make work with. And so I still, to this day, even though I have a lot more than I had when I first began, I still have the mentality of that, and I still kind of seek out what's readily available.
But you also want to quote the home somewhere, because once you told me that you use the paint that people choose for the homes, and you buy the rest.
I bought all those discounted paints because that's what I could afford. Yeah. And I've said this several times recently, but you know, like when I first began, it was really for economic reasons. They're $5 a gallon, and now they're $9 a gallon. So I mean, that's over like 20 plus years. Yes. So it was out of convenience. I think conceptually it works, just because again it is like I hate shopping at Home Depot because it's run by this right-wing company, but you know, everything perhaps in the States is, but you know, everywhere. But yeah, it's affordable materials. It's DIY, right? Do it yourself. So yeah, that's why I use those materials. Yeah. Yeah.
And do you have? I mean, with everything you do parallelly, you're evolving works over a long time. Do you think, and with the whole teaching at the time, so what is the future of your work? Do you have any ideas where you can?
I hope I have a thought or an idea for an artwork. I don't know. I am excited to get in front of the camera again. I haven't performed or done any work in that regard since like 2017. I did do a live work in 22. It's a work that I began in 2015. Actually, I began in 2013, but I performed it for the first time in 2015. So I'm excited to maybe work again with the camera and look at some texts and think about performance and movement. And I'm kind of excited about that. But I don't know exactly what shape it's going to take.